At the top of the program, we looked at the polls. Now let's look at the map. The UVA Center for Politics is projecting Hillary Clinton with 352 electoral votes. They have Trump at 173. 270, of course, wins you the White House. UVA shows just about all of the swing states as solid blue, likely or leaning blue towards Hillary Clinton. That includes states in the upper Midwest, as well as Florida and Pennsylvania. Plus, deep red Arizona is leading Democratic, and Utah right now is a toss-up thanks to Evan McMullin, a third-party Republican. Let's bring in our panel now for analysis. Richard Brodsky is here. He is a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU.
Hail and farewell.
Who is always looking for the right words. Dominic Carter is here, political journalist and author, as well as Mike Morey. Mike is the managing director at SKD Knickerbocker. And so the first theme that we've had tonight is trying to figure out exactly where this race is, because the polls seem to have it all over the place. I'm curious, Mike, where you think the race is tonight.
I think actually, if we could get beyond the spin of, oh, this poll tight and that one, it's been remarkably stable actually for several weeks. Hillary Clinton has an average lead of about 5 to 6 points. If you do the poll of polls, if you look at somewhere like Florida, she's been about 4 points ahead of Trump consistently. Give or take a point up or down. North Carolina is the same thing. Virginia's been the same thing. It's actually been a remarkably stable race over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks.
So despite all of the up and downs that we've seen since the conventions, you think this is really about the level where it has been all the way through?
Absolutely. I mean, Trump has not, at this point, at any point in any poll that I've seen, has he ever been able to break anywhere near 44%. It's been fairly stable. Hillary Clinton has consistently been somewhere between 46, 48 on average. Sometimes you're seeing her at polls a little bit over 50%. I know it makes for good news for everyone to talk about these new polls that come out. Is it tightening? Is it expanding? It's been remarkably stable.
So then why are these new polls coming out that lead to that argument that it might be tightening? What's going on?
Because the pollsters need to do some
thing. You really think that's...
No, I don't think they're cooked in any way, if that's the question. There are, over the course of time, there are outliers. You get weird results. It's actually been more stable than even the last 3 or 4 weeks. What's notable is that if you look at polling over the last 25, 30, 40 years, the race in November looks remarkably like the race September 1st. And whatever internal ups and downs there are, it tends to go back to that. I do think this is a particularly volatile year, and I wouldn't be surprised if it tightened not because Trump moves up, but because things like the Obamacare stuff, I think, have a potential to damage her a little bit. But I still think it's a fairly clear outcome.
Dominic, do you get a sense that Republicans who might have been wavering on Trump are starting to come back into the fold a little bit? Votes that might have gone to Gary Johnson or Evan McMullin or whomever else now all of a sudden are showing up for Trump?
It's possible, but God only knows what may develop next in this race as it relates to Donald Trump, what outrageous behavior may come next. So who knows, maybe his base is coming back home. I would agree the race is about 5% Hillary Clinton's favor. It depends on the poll. That's why you're getting different results. Some lean more Republican. Some lean more Democratic in terms of the sample size, the methodology that's used, as the pollster explained to you. There are so many different things that go into polls. And sometimes you can get a poll to almost say what you want it to say.
There's also a possible Trump Bradley effect, where people who might be tending Trump are ashamed of it in the public sense, don't want to talk about it, like we've seen in some of these races where race was a factor.
You could also see the opposite of that happening with, like, for example, Republican women who maybe to fit in at home will say that I'm voting for Trump, but maybe won't pull the lever based on some of his history.
There was a great piece done in the New York Times a few days ago that was looking at Iowa in particular, and they tailed a couple of Hillary Clinton canvassers who were targeting actually Republican households. And when they went to the door or the garage and bumped into the husband was unequivocal with them that this is a Donald Trump house, and they left. They purposely went back and called those houses to speak to the spouse, the woman. And what they wound up finding out was actually, despite what they heard at the door while canvassing, the female Republican in the House made it clear to them that they were voting for Hillary Clinton. So I think there may in fact be the opposite effect. We thought there'd be a Bradley effect in 2008 with Obama. That turned out not to be the case. didn't happen in 12. But I do think what is changing ever so slightly, and it might be because of Republican women, is if you look at, I mean, Quinnipiac came out today and said that Iowa is tied and Georgia is statistically tied, a 1-point difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, if that is true, and I don't know if it is, but if that is true, that would be a remarkable outcome.
It's also interesting that, at least in my experience, people made up their minds, the undecideds, in the last 5 to 7 days. Starting the Tuesday before the election, the end of that week was, okay, here's where I am. This race seemed to have crystallized about 2 weeks ago. And if that's the case, I think you can put it down to at least something I've been writing about, which is the ability of Donald Trump to stick his foot down his throat about up to the knee. If the kinds of things he said have people disqualifying him apart from issues, apart from anything else.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, because now that we have an idea of where we think the race is, the question is why? And is it that this is where the country just is in terms of the split between Democratic and Republican, or progressive and conservative? Or is it that Donald Trump is a bad candidate and has turned people off? I'm just curious why you all think the race is where it is.
Well, two things. I think to some degree it is that Donald Trump is a horrendous candidate. But I also think it is, let's just step back from that for a second and recognize that this electorate is so fundamentally different and has changed so fundamentally over the last decade that it is, on a national level, it's going to trend Democratic. If you look at sort of the population of the decreasing white male population in this country, the increasing, the diversity in this country and its proportion of the electorate at this point, this is a fundamentally changing electorate. And so that's going to start lending itself, and has, starting in 08, 12, and more so now, it's lending itself to the fact that you're going to wind up moving more center-left in a presidential election. But Donald's also atrocious.
So if we were asking people, just pick a generic Democrat or a generic Republican, no names or anything like that, you think it would be right around where it is, about 5 points towards the Democrat?
Maybe even a little bit more for the Democrat.
Why do you think we are where we are?
I really disagree. The Republicans have walked away from two parts of their historic base: the crazy right-wingers and the moderate women. They put them in play. The Democrats walked away from the middle-class Rust Belt voter that had been the union sort of voter that was the bulwark of their candidacy. That put people who don't fit into demographic categories in play. If Donald Trump did what he did about the New York Times reporter and the Khan family and the Access Hollywood tape and the I won't accept the results, and he's still 5 points behind, I think this race with a different Trump would have been a much tougher race for Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, I think a Democrat like Joe Biden, or maybe even Bernie Sanders, would have wiped the floor with a different kind of Republican. It's speculation, but if Trump, as bad as he is still within hailing distance, something's going on.
And that is what's remarkable when you think about it. For all his flaws, for all of the outrageous things that he has done, this is still a horse race. So that says to me, as I have always contended, that a lot of our presidential elections are personality driven. It's not just about issues. I know Mr. Brodsky's head is going to explode.
No. This every once in a while you're right.
Every once in a while.
The fact of the matter is
track record.
that this election,
I think I had a great track record.
Hillary walked away from making this election about ideas. Her ideas are better for the country. On economics, on
But she had
race
no
relations.
choice. Trump's throwing mud at her at every single step of the way.
No, she had no choice because nothing else was going to work. And she played the cards on personality beautifully, and yet he's 5 points behind.
But if you look at the numbers, so what has Donald Trump been successful at? Primarily appealing to non-educated whites in the country. And so if you were to suggest that you can run a campaign, a traditional campaign in this country that appeals to whites and whites alone, non-educated whites in particular, but even educated whites, it's just not a coalition that can bring you to the dance anymore. It's just not. It's impossible.
And if he hadn't offended Republican women, and imagine the Trump candidacy without all the foot and mouth stuff. Do you think the numbers would still be the same?
If you look at, take Hillary Clinton out of the equation. Against a generic Democrat, I think the numbers would be fairly the same. Look what happened with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney won educated whites. Women and men won them. Still lost, and lost by 4 points.
Okay, answer that. You changed my question. Answer the question. if he hadn't done all those stupid things, do you think the race would be the same?
Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I
You think this race would be 5 points up if he hadn't done the Khan family and the reporter and they don't accept
Are
the
you
results?
assuming that he wouldn't have done other stupid
I
things?
am assuming he wouldn't have done other things, yes.
I think that the race, the fundamentals of the election would still lend themselves to success of the Democratic candidate.
I tend to agree with Mike on that one. All right, we will leave the presidential race for tomorrow. We're going to go around the region in 8 minutes. Whether Governor Andrew Cuomo is trying to throw his weight behind state Senate Democrats, and also Mayor Bill de Blasio begins an image rehab. Also have the latest on Bridgegate.